the 15th of March 1939, 6 months after the annexation of the Sudetenland. Nazi Germany, in flagrant violation of the Munich Agreement, invades and occupies the Czech provinces of Bohemia and Moravia. Adolf Hitler himself arrives in Prague and on the 16th of March, by a proclamation from Prague Castle, establishes the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. Konstantin von Neurath, the former foreign minister of Nazi Germany, becomes its Reich protector, but because the Führer feels that his rule is too lenient and his soft approach to the Czechs has promoted anti-German sentiment and encouraged anti-German resistance via strikes and sabotage. In September 1941, he dismisses von Neurath and appoints Reinhard Heydrich as new acting Reich protector. Heydrich's Secretary of State and Chief of Police in the Protectorate is a man with whom the Nazi, architect of the Holocaust, launches reign of terror, arresting and killing opponents and ramping up the deportation of Jews to concentration camps. After Heydrich's assassination in May 1942, this man will conduct brutal reprisals against the Czechs, killing over 1,300 men, women, and children. His name is Karl Hermann Frank. Karl Hermann Frank was born on the 24th of January 1898 in Carlsbad. Today's Czech Karlovy Vary, then part of Austria-Hungary. His father Heinrich was an elementary school teacher and ardent German nationalist who brought up his son steeped in the German nationalist movement. When Karl was 9 or 10 years old, he was hit right in the eye by a rock while playing with other children. When the First World War began on the 28th of July 1914, Frank was 16 years old. He attempted to enlist in the Austro-Hungarian army, but was rejected due to the blindness in his right eye caused by the aforementioned injury. In 1918, even though the doctors tried to fix his eye for a long time, they eventually had to take it out and replace it with a glass one. In October 1918, the Czechoslovak National Council in Prague proclaimed the independence of Czechoslovakia. 50% of the Czechoslovak population consisted of Czechs. Germans and Slovaks accounted for 22% and 16%, respectively. Karl Hermann Frank was a Sudeten German, which was a name for ethnic Germans living in Czechoslovakia, and he became an extreme advocate of the incorporation of the Sudetenland, where he lived, into Germany. In 1919, he joined the proto-fascist Party of Germans in Czechoslovakia, named the German National Socialist Workers' Party. 6 years later, in 1925, Frank opened a bookstore which specialized in National Socialist literature. From 1933, when Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party came into power, the Nazi regime began not only to restrict the civil and human rights of the Jews, establishing the first concentration camps, but it also demanded the return of the Sudetenland to the German Reich. When over 3 days between the 11th and the 13th of March 1938, Adolf Hitler annexed the federal state of Austria into the German Reich. The failure of the British and French to take action against him for violating the Versailles Treaty emboldened him toward further aggression. In late summer 1938, Hitler threatened to unleash a European war unless the Sudetenland was ceded to Germany. This part of Czechoslovakia also contained the Czechoslovakia's defensive positions in event of a war with Germany. The leaders of Britain, France, Italy, and Germany held a conference in Munich between the 29th and the 30th of September 1938, in what became known as the Munich Agreement. They agreed to the German annexation of the Sudetenland in exchange for a pledge of peace from Hitler. The Czechoslovaks were not even invited to the conference and felt they had been betrayed by the British and French governments. However, many Sudeten Germans welcomed the German annexation, and Karl Hermann Frank was one of them. He was appointed Deputy Geleiter, or regional leader of the Nazi Party of the Sudetenland, and on the 1st of November 1938, he joined the Nazi Party and the SS. On the 15th of March 1939, less than 6 months after the annexation of the Sudetenland, Nazi Germany invaded and occupied the remaining parts of Czechoslovakia, establishing the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, which by contrast to the Sudetenland, consisted mostly of ethnic Czechs. Immediately after the Nazis started to occupy the whole country, they passed new anti-Jewish laws which were designed to exclude more than 118,000 Jews. that were living in the Protectorate from society and restrict their livelihood. Their bank accounts were frozen. They were forbidden to sell companies and real estate, which were confiscated and taken over by the Germans. In all, the Germans seized about $500 million, an equivalent to 11 billion United States dollars today, worth of Jewish property in the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. After the occupation of the Czech lands, Frank was promoted to SS-Obergruppenführer, which was a rank equivalent to Major General and appointed Secretary of State of the Reich. Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, under Reich Protector Konstantin von Neuruth. At the end of April 1939, Heinrich Himmler, the leader of the SS, also named Frank, the Protectorate's higher SS and police leader. In this position, Frank wielded great power in the Protectorate as he controlled the Nazi police apparatus, including the intelligence service, the SD, and the security police, which consisted of Gestapo and the Kripo, which was a criminal police. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. On the 17th of February of the following year, Frank divorced his wife Anna Muller. They married in January 1921 and had 2 sons. 2 months after his divorce, on the 14th of April 1940, he married Karola Blaszczak. His new wife was a doctor who was 15 years his junior. Their marriage produced 3 children, daughters Ida and Hall, and a son Wolf Dietrich. 2 years after the war began, on the 23rd of September 1941, Hitler relieved Neurath of his active duties and stripped him of his day-to-day powers. The reason was that, despite the persecution of Czech Jews and the harsh crackdown on those who turned to acts of resistance, his rule overall was too lenient by Nazi standards. Neurath, who even tried to restrain the excesses of his police chief, Karl Hermann Frank, still remained the Reich Protector on paper. But the real power was held by Reinhard Heydrich, who was named his deputy on the 29th of September 1941. Adolf Hitler gave Heydrich a mandate to enforce policy, fight resistance to the Nazi regime, and keep up production quotas of Czech motors and arms that were extremely important to the German war effort. After Heydrich arrived in Prague, he told his staff, "We will Germanize the Czech vermin," and demanded racial classification of those who could and could not be Germanized. Although the working relationship between Heydrich and Karl Hermann Frank was initially tense, the two men, both being ambitious and brutal, became an effective duo in treating the Czechs harshly. In October 1941, just 1 month after Heydrich's arrival, the systematic deportation of Jews from the territory of the Protectorate started with the transports to the D Ghetto, which was located in German-occupied. By the 3rd of November the same year, 5,000 Jews were deported to the ghetto. Only 277 out of 5,000 Jews deported to the D Ghetto survived. In November 1941, Reinhard Heydrich established the Theresienstadt ghetto, which was located in the fortress town of Terezin, in the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. The first transport of Czech Jews arrived in the same month. Heydrich and Frank launched a reign of terror in the Protectorate. According to Heydrich's estimate, between 4,000 and 5,000 people were arrested, and between 400 and 400 were executed by February 1942. On the 27th of May, 1942, Reinhard Heydrich was in his convertible Mercedes when he was wounded by the Czechoslovak paratroopers, Josef Gabke and Jan Kubis. 8. Even though Heydrich had an infection and was in great pain, on the 3rd of June he was able to eat his midday meal sitting up. However, a few hours later he collapsed, dying the next day. Heydrich's funeral in Berlin was attended by all the high-ranking Nazi officials, including his superior Heinrich Himmler and Adolf Hitler himself, who spoke at the funeral and promised revenge. The Nazi authorities in the Protectorate were preparing for this revenge. From the 27th of May 1942, when Heydrich was mortally wounded. On that day, Karl Hermann Frank proclaimed a state of emergency and placed a curfew in Prague. Anyone who helped the attackers was to be executed along with their families. A search involving 21,000 men began, and 36,000 houses were checked. By the 4th of June, 157 people had been executed as a result of the reprisals, but the assassins had not been found, and no information was forthcoming. On June 9th, the day of Heydrich's state funeral in Berlin, Frank reported from Berlin that the Führer had commanded the following concerning any village found to have harbored Heydrich's killers: execute all men, transport all women to a concentration camp, gather the children suitable for Germanization, then place them in SS families in the Reich, and bring the rest of the children up in other ways, burn down the village, and level it entirely. One such village became Lidis, which had been named in a love letter found during the first days of the SS and police investigations into the attack on Heydrich. Though there was no real evidence connecting the people of the town with the assassins, the Nazis used even the smallest pretext to take revenge for Heydrich's death and singled out Lidis as the site of retaliation.